Can you hear me?
Hello? Yeah, who is this?
Is Zach?
Oh, hey, all right. Hey, let me put you on the air. Hold on a second.
Okay, perfect.
We got Zachary K. Hubbard on the air. Hey, how you doing, Zach?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. Let me turn this down here. Thanks for coming on Brattleboro Community Radio. And where are you hailing from?
I'm out in Washington State.
All right. I used to live out in Washington State. I used to live in Richland, Washington.
Okay.
Big company town.
You miss it?
What's that?
Do you miss Washington?
It's some really nice onions there.
Walla sweet onions.
Yeah, I miss it a little bit, but I don't know. The soil is pretty amazing out there, though. You just add water and things grow. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, good agriculture out here.
Yeah. Well, we're not here to talk about agriculture. We're here to talk about gematria. I think I discovered your work possibly late 2015. I'm not even sure. I was trying to rack my brain, but it took me a while to wrap my brain around it. I was definitely fascinated by numerology in the past and numbers in general. Had something of a liking for numbers. And then I ran across your work and I was kind of blown away. So I'm sure you've explained gematria a million times, but let's explain it again, because every time I mention gematria to somebody, they're like, what's that?
Exactly. It's the thing that nobody's heard of before.
Nobody's ever heard of it.
Right. And just for the record, I pronounce the word wrong. I call it gematria just because I like the way it sounds, and because when I discovered it, nobody had ever taught me about it, and I thought that was the way it was pronounced. But I learned down the road it's actually gematria, but I still like to call it gematria because it just sounds so much better to me. So for people out there learning about it, what it is the ancient practice of coding numbers into words. And the main thing is putting words together that have natural relationships, words that go together, and also words that go together that have the same numerical value. And classic example, in gematria, when you use the alphabetic order, so A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4, E is 5, up to Z, the 26th letter is 26. When you use that cipher, it's called simple English gematria or gematria. Either way, simple English gematria. If you just use the alphabetic order, simple sums to 74. S is the 19th letter, I is the 9th, M's the 13th, P's the 16th, L's the 12th, E's the 5th. English sums to 74. So does gematria. They all sum to 74. And traditionally, this is a Jewish practice. It comes out of the Jewish mysticism Kabbalah. Kabbalah says that God created the world by merging the letter with the number with the word. So this code's in tribute to God. If you use the alphabetic order, the word Jewish sums to 74. This code's also important to Masonry. The word Masonic is 74. Coming back to the Jewish thing for a moment, it's common practice in Judaism to write out the name God, G-D. And this goes back to Kabbalah. There's this belief within Kabbalah that it's disrespectful to write out God's name with the letters. So that's why you write the G-D. You omit the O. If you write out God's name G-D, it becomes G's the 7th letter. So in letters to numbers, G7, D's 4. So it's 7-4. That's 74 thing again. And in Hebrew, where this code originally comes from, Hebrew, every letter is a number. That's an understood part of the Hebrew alphabet, whereas it's not true of English. Most people don't realize that about English. In English, every letter is a number as well, but it's not understood like how it is in Hebrew. In Hebrew, this code is in tribute to God, whose name is Elohim from the Old Testament. And in Hebrew, Elohim sums to 47. But consider in Hebrew, you read from right to left. Therefore, if you read 74 from right to left, it would also be 47. 47, 74 reflections of each other. And later on, we can talk about the significance of the Freemason logo if you want. The capital G with the compass above it set at 47 degrees, which is a tribute to the 47th problem of Euclid about how to establish foundation for a structure. The word foundation in gematria sums to 47, not by accident, just like how the compass is set at 47 degrees, which also brings us back to this nation that we're living in, the United States of America, which has the July 4th birthday. A lot of people in the U.S. write that date 7-4, but you can also flip that date around, 4-7, the way the majority of the world writes it. Foundation 47, the 47th problem of Euclid about how to establish foundation for a structure. If you write the date 7-4, just using the alphabetic order, simple English gematria, holiday sums to 74. The next most important cipher to know is using the alphabetic order in the rules of numerology. Before we did A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, up to Z is 26. Same idea, but then you just incorporate numerology. So A still 1, B still 2, C still 3. Where it changes is when you get to J. J is the 10th letter. The numerology of 10 is 1 plus 0 is 1. K, the 11th letter. 11 in numerology breaks down to 1 plus 1 is 2. L, the 12th letter, breaks down to 1 plus 2 is 3. When you get up to Z, the 26th letter, the numerology of 26 is 2 plus 6 is 8. Numerology is just about making numbers into single-digit numbers, adding the digits together until you get a single-digit number. If you write out Independence Day, it sums to 74 like holiday. That's also the cipher where foundation sums to 47. So anyway, that's a short spill on what gematria is. For anybody out there who's Christian, you might find it very interesting to know that if you write out the word Christian and use the alphabetic order and rules of numerology, it sums to 47. If you just use simple English gematria and you write out the name Jesus, you write out the word cross, you write out gospel, you write out parables, they all sum to 74. So does the word Messiah, Jesus from the land of Judea, Jewish 74. If you look this up, the English translation of Jesus is the name Joshua. Joshua even sums to 74. And oftentimes when I've explained this to people in the past, they say, well, maybe a lot of words sum to 74. Maybe most words sum to 74. I say, well, a good way to try that is to write out a lot of words and see if they sum to 74. You'll find that not every word sums to 74. And I think a good way to test that is to write out all 50 state names, decode all 50 state names, and you'll find that one of those 50 sums to 74. That's using the alphabetic order, simple English gematria. Happens to be the 33rd state, Oregon. And there's a whole lot more to that, but just to make the point very quickly, it's fairly rare for a word to sum to 74. So for Jesus, Messiah, cross, gospel, parables to all sum to 74, this special number, no accident. Yeah. And again, this code's largely Jewish. Jesus is said to be the Son of God. Jewish people write out God G-D, 7-4. So that's my quick little explanation. Back to you, friend.
Yeah. So Zach, when did you first arrive on this knowledge? I've heard some stories. Well, I think I've heard you say that after 9/11, you got more interested in this neurological code, as you were to call it. Can you describe what happened?
Sure. So it was 9/11 that set me on the trail to figuring this out, and it took a long time. I just knew on 9/11 I was being lied to. I just knew it was no accident. This perfect demolition of towers that dissolved into dust into midair as they collapsed to the ground, and then it being blamed on a man in a cave across the world, and it coming on 911 when we all know that's our national emergency dialing code. I knew I was being played the fool, and I was surprised that more people around me didn't see it. I found myself pretty isolated at that point in my life because I wanted to speak out about this lie, and everybody wanted to, literally everybody my age. I was just barely 18 years old at the time. Seemed like everybody around me wanted to fight me when I brought this up, as if I was some unpatriotic a-hole. So, I ended up doing a lot of research and trying to get to the bottom of what was going on. Why was I being made the fool on 911? What was it about this date that I didn't know? And as I was doing my research, I learned about things such as the dancing Israelis in New Jersey. And I thought that was interesting. And I noticed that it was the leader of Israel, Ehud Barak, who said we needed to declare a war on terrorism and we needed to go to Afghanistan and Iraq. And I thought, that seems time with the dancing Israeli thing. So I was just taking notes and trying to figure out how these pieces of the puzzle went together. And when I was doing my research, I noticed that 911 was made the national emergency dialing code in 1968. Lo and behold, on the 47th day of the year, February 16th, I noticed that World Trade Center construction began in 1968. I noticed that George W. Bush graduated from Yale and Skull and Bones. One of my favorite movies around that time happened to be 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I noticed that movie came out in 68. I thought, is that a coincidence? That's also in 68? Because I noticed that was 33 years from 68 to 2001. And somewhere along the way, I'd heard that was a special number, something kind of like how I had a girlfriend when I was about 15 clue me into the 1111 thing. You're supposed to make a wish at 1111. She was probably the first one to ever really get me thinking about numbers being something useful outside of mathematics or accounting or keeping track of your bank account or et cetera, et cetera. That was probably my first introduction to even thinking about numerology. And so anyway, I was just compiling these pieces of the puzzle and trying to make sense of it. And in the time I was trying to figure out what was going on in the world, I saw the repetition of certain numbers being used in news media again and again. And the number that I did see the most, even before I understood gematria, was 47. I just was noticing how often 47 was in a headline or some key numerical detail of a story. And I just kept seeing it. I thought, what is it about this number? Why do I see 47 again and again? And I was researching and looking for answers from the time I was 18 until shortly after my 30th birthday. And it was I believe it was August of 2013 when I read over the word gematria. Well, that I didn't know how to pronounce, and I've ran with ever since. And once I found that word and the practice of coding numbers into words, I thought, could this be the missing piece of the puzzle? And I didn't know if it was. So I just started, I read the simple definition. It was about, pairing words together that have logical relationships and words that have numerical overlap. And within days, I found the thing with Jesus, Messiah, cross, parables, gospel. I thought, whoa, that doesn't seem like an accident. And I took the time to decode all 50 states. I took the time to decode every nation in the world. I started decoding news stories. And when I started to decode news stories, I started to see that the key words and names and phrases and what was emphasized in the headlines, what I would decode, I would find again and again those same numbers reported in the details of the story. And I thought, whoa, this has to be what they're doing. And I sat there for a year, and in all of my free time, I would just decode as much as I could until I was absolutely certain that this code was in use. And this is what we were bearing witness to in the news each day, this secret code of encoding numbers and words and ritualistic patterns that had to do with the content of the story. And one of the first things I woke up to was how the number 44 was coded into shootings again and again. The word shootings 44, the word gunfire is 44, and there's a whole lot more to that. And if you just, even without the gematria, you can just see how often 44 comes up in shootings. We just had the synagogue shooting in Pennsylvania, and the shooter was given 44 charges, not by accident. And the same pattern persist day after day. We just had the recent shooting on Thanksgiving in Alabama. That was a date with numerology of 44. The same numbers coded all over the shooting and the details. There's even a shooting today in Bethesda, Maryland at a military hospital. Walter Reed, Bethesda's 44, hospitals 44, military's 44. Anyway, you just go event by event, you'll see how repetitive the use of the numbers was. And after I documented it for a year, I was ready to go forth and start making videos. And I began my YouTube video channel in August of 2014. And the first story I covered was the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson, Missouri. And there's another set of repetitive numbers in that incident that have to do with the racially based shootings, the white officers shooting the black cops, etc. There's a set of numbers they love to code in those. And we can talk about that later if you want, but give it back to you for now.
Well, I don't know how many hours you got, but I only have 2. So we'll do what we can, I guess.
Sure.
So you started a blog, Free to Find Truth. People can go there and check out your work. Another question I hear a lot, and I'm sure you've heard this too, is what's the relevance of this? All right, these words, these names, they add up to a certain thing. They all add up to the same thing. What does that mean to me? Why are you bothering me with this? What's the relevance of it? It may be true, but what does it mean?
Sure. So this is only going to have meaning to you if you care about the truth and if you see the agenda that's upon us. Like, for example, for me, what it was about was definitively proving, well, when I first started this, what I was after was proving that we were absolutely lied to on 9/11. It was a planned and coordinated event for an agenda. And some people see that even without the gematria, myself included. I was explaining to people for years, that there was this think tank called the Project for a New American Century. They'd written a document calling for a new Pearl Harbor to start this military agenda in the Middle East and this domestic surveillance agenda at home. And that Project for a New American Century became the Bush administration, essentially. They wrote that just before they took office. So I was explaining things that were very logical and that I thought people would connect with, and it didn't seem to be enough evidence. So I was like, well, I guess I got to find something more than just what should be common sense enough to connect the dots for people. I got to find something greater, something that really proves just how planned out all of this is. And to me, that's what gematria is. And I know from experience now, from doing this for 5 years straight, some people will just dismiss this because they don't even want to consider it. They don't care that much about truth. It seems ridiculous on the surface, so they don't really put much thought to it. But I know that, there's been countless people, hundreds if not thousands, who said, wow, I really appreciate your work. And this is the thing that finally got me to see the lies for what they are. And, going back to the 9/11 68 thing, well, 68 starts to make a lot more sense when you realize that terror in gematria sums to 68. And just think about George W. Bush. Anybody who was alive, if you could do a word count on the things that guy said while he was president, no doubt the word that came out of his mouth more than any other, and this goes for the rest of his administration too, was terror. And it's not an accident that from his birthday, July 6th to September 11th is a span of 68 days either. So what this code does is it gives meaning beyond what can already be observed. For example, just to stick with George W. Bush for a moment, a lot of people recognize that it seemed foul or corrupt how the election of him becoming president came down to Florida, where his brother was the governor, and where for the month up to the election, the media told us 1,000 times over that election was going to come down to Florida, which it did. And at first it was called in Gore's favor. Then they flipped it and gave it to Bush, where again, his brother was the governor. Now, if you go back and look more carefully, his brother was the 43rd governor of Florida. George W. Bush became the 43rd president. His father was the 43rd vice president to Reagan, and he was also the 41st president himself. But with regards to that 43 pattern, him and his father, who were both presidents, they both went to Yale. And Yale's the home of Skull and Bones, which both the father and son were members of, a secret society that identifies by a number. Yale, just using the alphabetic order. Y is the 25th letter, A is the first, L is the 12th, E is the 5th. You add it together, Yale is 43. In our reduction gematria, numerology, Florida is also 43. And, you know, to me, that just shows you. It just shows you how ritualistic it really all is. And you can go from election to election. It's not just George W. Bush. It's all of these guys. It's just like with Donald Trump, the current sitting president. I told people when he had his convention July 18th, 18/7, like 187, that very well might be the sign that he is destined for the throne, because from July 18th to Inauguration Day was a span of 187 days. Washington, D.C., George Washington, ancient accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry, they all have that gematria of 187. And for people who don't know, the headquarters of the Scottish Rite is in Washington, D.C. Of course, the city is named after the Scottish Rite Freemason George Washington. What's etched on that building is ancient accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, summing to 187. That's how many chapters are in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, where largely this code and the meaning behind the numbers comes from. So, you know, to me, the knowledge is about having the evidence to see what's truly being done to us, why it's being done, why the numbers are being used. And having this knowledge, it gives a lot of clarity to a lot of subjects.
Right. Well, for me, all the crazy things that Trump does every day, like people are always like, you know, wondering, why is he doing this? Why is he doing that? And to me, the gematria makes sense about why he's doing what he's doing, you know, what day it is, you know, and obviously the gematria of what he's talking about kind of makes it plain, because to the outsider, it's like, why is Trump acting like such an idiot, like an a-hole, like all the time, you know? And it seemed like a very carefully choreographed act, you know? So you mentioned Kabbalah and Freemasonry, and talking about what's the correlation between Kabbalah and Freemasonry? Because you're talking about Freemasonry, what's the connection?
Sure. Before I answer that, just to emphasize what you were just saying about Trump and daily actions, for people out there who don't know, literally every day, if you use this code, you can see why Trump and everything is in the news on the day it is. For example, the big thing is Trump is threatening the GM CEO with taking away the subsidies today. Today's the 27th. It's 27 days from the CEO's birthday of GM today. It's the 27th, and it's 27 days from her birthday. The word subsidy equals 27. And the plural subsidies has gematria of 35, like plants, like vehicle. Yesterday, this whole story began on the day leaving 35 days left in the year. And literally every day you can go and see why the news story is what it is by this code. It's theater by the numbers. As for the connection between Freemasonry and Kabbalah, so there's multiple ways to explain this. One easy way to understand the connection between Freemasonry and Kabbalah is through the writings of Albert Pike. He wrote the text Morals and Dogma. And if you go to Washington, D.C., there's a statue of Albert Pike holding his book, Morals and Dogma. In that text, he says that Freemasonry owes all thanks, again, to Kabbalah. Now, what's interesting is in Hebrew, Kabbalah sums to 137. 137, that's the 33rd prime number. A minute ago, I said that Washington, D.C. sums to 187, which it does. That's when you flip the alphabetic order around. There's 4 base ciphers. The alphabetic order, A is 1 up to Z is 26. The reverse alphabetic order, Z is 1 back to A is 26. And then those 2 orders using the rules of numerology. Those are your 4 base ciphers. If you just use the regular alphabetic order, Washington, D.C. sums to 137. So does the text Morals and Dogma. They both sum to 137. Words such as government and authority have this gematria of 137. White House, special number. 137 is the 33rd prime number, the 33rd prime. And using the alphabetic order and the rules of numerology, Masonry, secrecy, order, federal, they all sum to 33. Remember, Washington, D.C. is named after the 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, George Washington. And the headquarters of D.C., or the headquarters of Freemasonry in D.C., the House of the Temple, that building on the outside has 33 pillars that are each 33 feet tall. So Freemasonry is based in a lot of occult knowledge, what's known as the ancient mystery religions. One of those things is Kundalini. Kundalini says that spiritual ascension happens up the 33 bones of the human spine. 33. With the alphabetic order and the rules of numerology, people in person both sum to 33. Special number. So Freemasonry is based in the ancient mystery religions, which includes Kundalini. It includes Kabbalah. It includes Hermeticism and alchemy. Hermeticism has these 7 principles. They go back to Thoth, the Egyptian god, also Hermes, the same person in Greek culture. One of those principles is the principle of vibration. And that is that everything in this world carries a vibration. Every letter, every number, every shape, every symbol, everything. And these vibrations are subtle and they have real world influence on what happens in our life and our behaviors. And this is part of what's connected to the study of numerology. So anyway, Freemasonry is based in this old knowledge, set of things that most people of modern times have completely forgotten. And one of those things is Kabbalah. And if you read Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, he says that's the component that is most important to Freemasonry. Consider that Freemasonry is largely based in the Old Testament as well, which is the Jewish section of the Bible, and Kabbalah is traditionally considered Jewish mysticism. That said, it has been adopted into many other modern religions, including Christianity. So, you know, if you study Freemasonry, you learn it has a lot to do with the Old Testament, Solomon's Temple, etc., etc. And this is the greater link.
You have the Tree of Life too, representing the 2 pillars of Freemasonry.
Absolutely.
Joaz.
Absolutely.
What's the other guy's name?
With regards to the Tree of Life, if you open up Genesis, the first book of the Bible, by the way, if you use the alphabetic order and write out in the beginning, it sums to 137. If you write out Genesis and use the alphabetic order and rules of numerology, Genesis sums to 33. Genesis means in the beginning, 137, the 33rd prime. Genesis 3:2:2 is the 78th verse of Genesis. If you just write out Genesis with the alphabetic order, it sums to 78. If you've ever read Genesis, it begins with a lot of "and God said," "and God said," "and God said." That phrase with the alphabetic order is 78. But Genesis 3:2:2 speaks to the Tree of Life, which is the physical model for Kabbalah. And
is that why? Oh, I'm sorry. Is that why Skull and Bones has 322 as their number?
It's very likely, because in Gematria, if you flip the alphabetic order around, you make Z as 1 and you count back to A as 26, and you write out ancient mystery religions, it sums to 322. And if you write out Abrahamic religions, it sums to 322. 322. Genesis 3:2:2 is about the Tree of Life, knowing good and evil. And in Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, there's a good side that's about learning about spiritual ascension. There's also an evil side known as the Klippoth, which is about essentially what people would refer to as witchcraft and sorcery and hurting other people. And I want to clarify my words. There might be somebody out there listening who's educated in witchcraft. All of witchcraft isn't evil either. You know, a lot of witches in the past, what they studied witchcraft for was to bless their crops so they'd have a bountiful harvest. to do natural medicine to heal people. So all things, good and evil, all things good and bad, all things are dualistic in this world. But so often in our society, when we hear witchcraft, we think evil, and even that's programmed into my mind. So that's what first came out of my mouth before I clarified my words. But there is a good and evil half of Kabbalah. Also, if you look up the verse to Genesis 3:22, if you take the first sentence, and you can do this with the New International Version wording and with the King James wording, they're both worded differently, but both have the same numerical value. If you copy that first sentence and paste it into the Gematria calculator, I know you had Derek on your radio program some time ago. Derek built that website, Gematria. If you copy that first sentence from the King James Version and from the New International Version and paste it, you'll see that when you use the reverse alphabetic order with the rules of numerology, both wordings sum to 322, and that is not an accident. And yes, that is part of the reason Skull and Bones identifies by that number. They are a Masonic order. Masonry is invested in this code. Another thing along the way that really woke me up was in 2004 when Tim Russert of Meet the Press interviewed George W. Bush and John Kerry and asked, what's the deal with both of you guys being in Yale Skull and Bones 322? Can you tell me more about the number? And neither of them would tell anything. But that made me go out and do my own research, and I learned right away that was a secret society that allowed 15 members per year, so a very small group. And I said, what are the odds of that? Two people in a secret society that are the two front runners for the presidency. I said, you can't tell me that this isn't, and I already had it after George W. Bush. I've honestly never voted in an election because I just saw this is the land of kings and queens and major lies and deception. I knew that the whole thing was a joke. And after seeing that in 2004, that would have been the first vote election where I was old enough to vote. Again, I was 17 in 2000. Or the first presidential election where I was allowed to vote. And I just said, there's no way I'm participating in this. This is voting. This is validating a lie. You can't tell me that two guys from the secret society that are this small are the front runners and there's not some sort of foul play going on here.
Right. My first voting experience was 1988. I was 18 and I voted for Dukakis, and I never voted for a Democrat or Republican since. Just vote like third or fourth party or not at all, because I was just like, oh my God, they made him look ridiculous in a tank, and that's why he lost. I mean,
right.
It's so clear to me at a young age as well. But it took a while. Obviously, it took a while for me to find Gematria. And for me, it kind of ties things together. As you're saying, it makes things like, it's kind of proof to the conspiracy.
Absolutely.
That we see all around us.
Absolutely.
So I had a question about, this is what I get too a lot, like, kind of like the same thing of, who would kill their own people and who would bomb why would you bomb yourself? Why would you spray things in the air that come down and hurt you? So like, who's doing the coding? Who's putting these numbers in the headlines? Who's doing this? Is this a person? Is this a computer? What's happening here? Do you know?
So I have theories. I can only know so much. It's ongoing research, but let's just put the facts on the table. We know that this code is important largely to two groups of people: Kabbalists, which are mostly Jewish, but not all. This code's important within the Catholic Church. Also important to Masonry. And if you go back to the founding of this nation, if you look at where this nation's headquarters are, there were a lot of Masons that were founders. And where Washington, D.C. was once the Catholic colony. And so that's why D.C. is between Virginia and Maryland, like Virgin Mary. And now D.C. is the headquarters of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Well, there's something really interesting about the Jesuits, who are the secret society that operate by these Masonic principles within the Catholic Church. The Jesuits once controlled the Catholic colony that's now that area. The motto of the Jesuits is the same motto as the 32nd degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. They have the same motto. And the reason that's so interesting is because in Gematria, Jesuit equals 84, Masonry equals 84, United States of America equals 84. We have the first publicly Jesuit Pope right now who does everything by this code. His birthday is December 17th, 1936. 12 plus 17 plus 19 plus 36. His birthday has 84 numerology. So there's this overlap with Masonry and Jesuit and Gematria and the United States of America. And again, we're painting the picture of how the Jesuits and the Scottish Rite fit together. Now, the word America in Gematria, just America alone, as well as the word Scottish, they both sum to 32. 32. America's date of establishment, 7/4/1776, was a date with 32 numerology. And one of the history lessons that we get from a young age in our public school programming is that Christopher Columbus, who was Jewish, who was paid for by the Catholic Church, you know, he planted the seeds that helped this nation come to be what it is. So there's also a lot interesting that's coded about the name Christopher Columbus with those CC 33 initials. Anyway, you take what's on the surface, what we can take from our history and see what's at the root of this nation. Then we can come to understand that these organizations operate by this code. And then we can apply this code and see that every single day news is being contrived in this way across the world, just like how Masonry is across the world, just like how the Jesuits are across the world. And you could say, okay, if these are the architects of this nation, or if these are the entities that are responsible for the building of this nation and what it became, and just to take a moment on the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church, the story is that at the end of the Crusades, the Knights Templar, who were the Masons of their time, they recovered this knowledge of Kabbalah and they brought it back to the Catholic Church. And from the Catholic Church, it spread to European royalty. You've heard the term the cabal, like for the secret, powerful political faction, that comes from Kabbalah. Anyhow, if we can just trace history, understand how this knowledge is spread, who's using it, who's at the root of the power structure of this nation, we can start to, put the pieces of the puzzle together and say, okay, these seem to be the power players. These are also the entities that have enough influence and spread across this world to make this happen. And to me, it seems obvious that the agenda is waged by these entities, these secret society Masonic alliances, the Catholic Church, and the things that they control, including government and media. So
right, it's pretty well known that the media has been infiltrated. Project Mockingbird, and all other kinds of infiltration. So perhaps it was, well, not infiltrated. It was infiltrated from the beginning. Zach, are you there?
I'm there. Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening.
Okay. I'm having my daughter's here with me, so she's asking me questions while I'm talking. Stop! Oh my goodness. So let's talk about your blog here. You have Redefine Truth, and also you have two YouTube channels called Gematria Effect Sports, Gematria Effect News. Now, sports is a big thing. This country is obsessed with sports. Well, not just this country, but all over the world. But I'll speak just about this country because that's all I know. I grew up being obsessed with sports as well. And before Gematria, I was starting to get the feeling that sports were fixed. Back in the 80s, back in the 90s, I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe these plays. I can't believe, that they won, how fitting, and all this kind of stuff. And Gematria, for me, put the nail in the coffin even more so. It was already kind of there. But talk about your sports channel and talk about the fixing of sports.
Yeah, so when I first began this research, again, I was focused on the propaganda in the news, and it wasn't long after I learned the code that I started to see. Again, I'd done all the research on city and state names, and some of them had stuck in my head, and I just started to look at scores, and I'd go, "Wow, that team won with the amount of points that corresponds with their city name and today's date numerology." I was like, is that a coincidence? But then, I'd look through a few more scores. I'd be like, wait a minute. It's the same thing there. It's the same thing there. So I was like, well, I better go look at the history of this. Maybe this is just a coincidence day. So I started to say, wait a minute. Wait a minute. This has been going on. So, I realized just how repetitive it was. And in 2014 was the year that I made my first sports prediction, and I said why the Mets would be in the World Series, and I was laughed off of YouTube. Oh, I wish my channel wasn't deleted because you could go back and read the comments. Just everybody who found that video was like, dude, this is the most crackpot thing I have ever heard. And to say the Mets are going to be in the World Series, no way. And what I was looking at was that was going to be the 111th World Series when I made that prediction. And New York, using the alphabetic order, sums to 111. And consider September 11th happened on the day, leaving 111 days left in the year. New York's also the 11th state. There were all these riddles in the news with Matt Harvey at the time. He was getting all this attention. He was the big star in New York. And that's what allowed me to say it was going to be the Mets and not the Yankees. Because somebody out there is probably saying, well, how would you know it would be the Mets and not the Yankees? And earlier in that season, I said it could even possibly be another Subway series, I wasn't sure who the opponent of the Mets was going to be. But I was certain based on what I was decoding that it would be the Mets in the 111th World Series. And sure enough, the Mets did end up in the 111th World Series. And I even called a score right in that series. It was Game 3. I said why the Mets would win it 3-9, or you could read it the other way, 9-3. Everything in New York is coded 39. NY, the abbreviation, is 39 with the alphabetic order. If you flip the alphabetic order around and write out NYC, it equals 39. If you write out New York with the alphabetic order and the rules of numerology, New York is 39. If you write out New York, comma, NY and use the reverse, it sums to 39. It also sums to 93. Think about the 93 World Trade Center bombing. Think about Flight 93. Think about how they said the first building hit the World Trade Centers at 903. The new building that's there, One World Trade Center, sums to 93. The United Nations there is 39 floors tall. Every single Super Bowl won by a New York team comes back to the number 39. It's either in the score, the date numerology, or the location. One of the Super Bowls in Indianapolis was on the 39th parallel. But 4 by the Giants, by the way, G-Min equals 39 with the alphabetic order. That's the nickname for the Giants. One Super Bowl for the Jets, which was in 68, the year the whole 911 thing went down. New York Jets, 911, riddles, think about it. Anyway, the Jets won 16-7. 167 is the 39th prime. The Giants have won 4. All of the Super Bowls come back to 39, not by accident. So anyway, there were all these headlines about the World Series the day of Game 3, and they were all emphasizing headlines that summed to 39 and 93. And I said, you just watch. Tonight's score is going to be 3-9 or 9-3. Sure enough, it was. Sure enough, it was. And that was the only game New York won in that World Series. If you go back to how they were closed out in the 111th World Series by the Kansas City Royals, I still remember what it was. Matt Harvey was on the mound. His last pitch of the game on November 1st, 11-1, was his 111th. And you can go back and watch the highlights, the beauty of the internet. You can look up his at-bat. I'm trying to think of the name of the Royal that was up to bat. Is it Hosmer? That might be his name. But if you go and look up the at-bat for Matt Harvey's, his last pitch, the guy comes up to bat with a 111 batting average for the World Series. They put it right on the screen. Matt Harvey's 111th pitch. This guy smacks into the outfield and drives in the first run of the game for the Royals. They pull Harvey on his 111th pitch in the 111th World Series on November 1st. And Then the Royals put in a few more runs, and the series ended there on November 1st. So that was the first sports prediction I made correct. And since I've been doing this, I've been able to call at least 1 or 2 teams in the World Series since spring training each year. The next year, my confidence was up even more, and I made a guarantee that the Cubs would win the 112th World Series, and I said why they would win it on November 2nd, which they went on to do. What I knew was it was going to be 108 years. 108 years since the Cubs had won the World Series. 108 matters. On a Major League Baseball, there's 108 double stitches. If you write out Major League with the alphabetic order, it sums to 108. 108. And if you write out Major League with the alphabetic order and the rules of numerology, it sums to 45. The Cubs hadn't been in the World Series since 45. Wrigley happens to equal 45. So does Illinois. So does Cubs with the alphabetic order. Cubbies hadn't been in the World Series since 45. They were going to break the 108-year drought. And the thing about 108 is, with the alphabetic order, the word geometry sums to 108. Now, gematria means geometry and language. If you flip the alphabetic order around and you make Z1 and count back to A as 26, geometry still sums to 108. There's not a lot of words that sum to 108 forwards and backwards. It's relatively rare to have that perfect symmetry. And symmetry is an important concept in geometry. Now, where 108 gains its significance is in your science textbook. You can look this up if you don't know it. It's a fact, at least as so reported in our science books. They say that the diameter of the sun, the distance across the sun, is the diameter of 108 Earths. So you put 108 Earths side by side. That's how wide the sun is. And from the sun to the Earth is the diameter of 108 suns side by side. That's the distance from the sun to the Earth according to modern science. Also, from the moon to the Earth is the diameter of 108 moons. This is supposedly how you get the perfect symmetry for the eclipses. So 108 is this special number. If you look into yoga, there's such a thing as 108 sun salutations. There's 108 prayer beads in Catholicism. There's numerous examples of 108. And there's an article you can look up on the web. It came out just before the 112th World Series where the Cubs broke the 108-year curse about all the 108 in the history of Chicago. And it was just a mind-blowing article. One of the most standout things that I was even pointing out that season was that the tallest building in Chicago is 108 stories tall. Used to be the Sears Tower. Now it's the Willis Tower. And that name Willis Tower has the same gematria as World Series. So anyway, the thing about them breaking the 108-year curse in the 112th World Series on November 2nd, 11/2, is that when you write out mathematics with the alphabetic order, it sums to 112. Like 1 + 1 is 2. 1, 1, 2. So I was dead set on that riddle. There was a big tribute that happened early in the season for the Cubs. Their pitcher, Jake Arrieta, got a no-hitter 46 days from his birthday. I'm actually going on the gematria calculator because I don't want to misspeak here. But Chicago sums to 46, and yeah, I just did double check it. No hitter with the alphabetic order and the rules of numerology sums to 46. And I pointed out that the year prior, Jake DeGrom of the Mets, he was involved in the first no-hitter of the season, the year the Mets went. So I said, there's another pattern you can follow, another numerological no-hitter, a team that's going to be in the World Series, and bada bing, bada boom, the Cubs won the World Series. Now, another sign that the Cubs were going to win the World Series, and part of the reason I felt the ability to guarantee it was because I actually went to Vegas to place money on it, and I was so devastated when I found out that the sports book there and this is in spring training in March. I went down there at the beginning of March 2016. I was going to put money on the World Series. They were only paying out 2-1 on the Cubs. I could not believe it. I was like, you're only paying out 2-1? The season hasn't even began. So, that was another sign to me that they were destined for the World Series. The sportsbook wasn't paying out anything. I mean, that's pretty unheard of to only pay 2-1. For example, the Patriots, who are always in the Super Bowl, usually even at the beginning of the season, they're paying 5-1 to win the championship. So
those are the odds, right?
Right. So 2-1 is just doubling your money. And that's not a good investment. I mean, when the games are rigged, you can double your money a lot easier than putting it all down at the beginning of the season and waiting till the end of the season just to get a 2-1 payout. So anyway.
Well, the reason I was talking about sports is that, it just seems like so many people are glued to their screens watching the sports and they think it's all real. And I mean, without gematria, I can tell you it's not real, that it's rigged, that and gematria is like, the icing on the cake. There's so much betting that goes on in sports. There's so many finishes that are just like Hollywood.
Right. With the announcer yelling out, you couldn't have scripted it any better.
Yeah, right. That's their battle cry, right?
Right.
We got to take a short break here, and then we'll come back. We're at the top of the hour here. We're speaking here with Zachary K. Hubbard. He is the founder of Free to Find Truth blogspot. Check out his blog, Gematria Effect Sports, Gematria Effect News. We'll be back in a second and listen to Buttermilk, another experience you won't soon forget. Let's go back here.
For the chat room, we're on a 1 hour break. We'll be right back. Or not a 1 hour break. We're on a 2-minute break. We got an hour left. So sit tight.
VW.
It's Zach.
Hey, man. Sorry about that. I don't know what I was doing.
It's okay.
All right. How you doing?
Doing well, man. Are we back on?
Right, cool. No, not yet. I was just I got to do this little break, and then we'll come back on in like 5 seconds or so, 10 seconds.
Hey, what was that music you were playing at the beginning of the show?
Played some Peter Tosh.
Was that Peter Tosh at the beginning? I need that song. I was liking that song at the beginning.
You Let Jah Be Praised.
I like reggae music, period, but I hadn't heard the song that you're playing at the beginning. I was like, I need to know what this song is.
There's another one that I played after that. This is pretty fitting. It's by a protege called Camera Show.
Okay.
Like seeing as that, we now know what's going on. Everything's a camera show.
Right.
It's kind of putting it together. It's so funny though how, because like they're all agents basically, but try to put it together. They're so close yet they're not quite there yet, because it's always perceived to be they're racist, they're this or they're that, and the guys that we got on our side are good.
Right. Right.
All right, we'll come back on and maybe we'll do some story breakdowns and stuff.
Sure.
I know you got a ton of that.
We could even talk about the death of Peter Tosh if you wanted to, and Bob Marley. All their deaths are synced up.
Oh yeah, we could do that.
Whatever you want to do, man. It's your show.
Sure. All right, hold on a second. Pockets. We got Zachary K. Hubbard on the phone there. My daughter in the background. How you doing, Zach?
Doing well. Good to be back.
Yeah, good to be back. Hey, I looked something up on the Gematria calculator. If those that don't know, go to gematrinator.com. Check out this calculator. It makes gematria a lot easier. I mean, you can do it in your head. You can do it on a piece of paper. And but if you don't have that, you can use the calculator. Anyway, I looked up New York Jets. If you write out NY Jets, it equals 93. It's another 39.
Nice. Nice work.
This took a second too.
Right.
Right. So if one goes to your blog, you'll find out all these stories, and sometimes you just put up like one post because it's apparent to you what's going on here. Talk about a few stories that you've decoded that really make it undeniable.
Okay, let's just talk about something recent. So November 11th, earlier this month, there was a story about Joe Biden putting a medal, I believe it was the Medal of Freedom, around George W. Bush's neck. And in that same day, there was a story about a recount getting underway in Florida, which got to remind anybody who was alive then of George W. Bush. It was the first recount of its kind since the 2000 election. And there were a few other subtle headlines that people might not have caught on to. The voice of Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey died that day. And his name is Douglas Rain. So remember, we talked earlier about how in 1968, that film came out, 2001: A Space Odyssey, World Trade Center construction began, 911 was made the national emergency dialing code. George W. Bush graduated from Yale and Skull and Bones. From his birthday, July 6th to September 11th is a span of 68 days. The word terror equals 68. The name of the actor who played Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey, Douglas Rain, his name sums to 68. Now, he died on 11/11, this exact same day that Bush was getting this medal. Now, the thing about 11/11 is we're on the Gregorian calendar. Before we were on the Gregorian calendar, we were on the Julian calendar, and that pretty much pushed the month count up too. So on the Julian calendar, 11/11 would have been 9/11. So subtle tribute to 9/11, him getting this honor ring. And the thing is, it wasn't just those stories in the news that day. Another story from that same day, Joe Perry of Aerosmith was performing at MSG, Madison Square Garden. He collapsed while performing at age 68 for another 68 there. Another thing that happened that day that almost nobody would ever catch on to, the final episode of Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown was aired on CNN. Now, the thing about CNN and 9/11 is CNN was the news network, the first one to show a plane flying into the World Trade Centers. They were the first news network to do that. But the thing about Bourdain's final episode was that it was in New York, his home city, And let's not forget that New York's the 11th state. September 11th was on the 11th day of the month. The World Trade Centers looked like massive 11s. It was flight AA-11 that crashed into the World Trade Centers first. But Anthony Bourdain died this year on June 8th, 6-8, like another 68. And the thing is, from the date of his death until the final episode on 11/11 in New York, that was 156 days later. So why does 156 days matter? 911 is the 156th prime number. There's something called Jewish gematria. It's using the cipher with the English letters that is in the old arrangement of the Latin alphabet. And it pays tribute to Hebrew gematria and Greek isopsophy. Isopsophy is gematria in the Greek language. In Jewish gematria, Tisha B'Av sums to 911. Tisha B'Av is to remember the destruction of the two temples. Okay, the destruction of the two temples, the destruction of the two towers. Tisha B'Av is a Jewish holiday. This is known as Jewish gematria. You had the dancing Israelis on September 11th. You had the Jewish leader of Israel telling us to declare a war on terrorism against Afghanistan and Iraq. Advice we followed. 911 being the 156th prime is interesting because false flag sums to 156 in Jewish gematria. Also, if you write out the word 33 with the alphabetic order, our most simple cipher where we began was simple English gematria, 33 sums to 156, like how it was 33 years from 68 to 2001. If you write out false flag with the alphabetic order and the rules of numerology, false flag sums to 33. So there's this relationship between 33 and 156. Again, when you write out 33, it's 156. And there's a relationship between 156 and 911. 911 is the 156th prime. The construction firm that built the World Trade Centers was Magnuson Klemenkic Associates, and their name sums to 156. Now, Magnuson Klemenkic Associates is from Seattle, Washington, my land. And I've called this firm so many times to ask them if they had any foreknowledge at 9/11. They'll never call me back. But the thing is, on 11/11, one of the big headlines was that there was a massive fire burning in Seattle on this same day where there were all of these other rituals. So you have to say, what are the odds? What are the odds of all of these pieces of the puzzle lining up so nicely in light of the fact that they already have this historical relationship with 9/11 and 1968? And here I am, somebody who wrote a book about this, and I have a very long chapter on September 11th where I focus on the numbers 33, 68, 156, 911. Now on this date, 11/11, which is pretty much 9/11 on the Julian calendar, you get this big tribute to the man himself, George W. Bush. And also, if you've read my book, I show the parallels between the Oklahoma City bombing and September 11th. And, why can't I think of his name right now? The man blamed for that, his name escapes me in the moment. Timothy McVeigh.
Timothy McVeigh.
There it is, Timothy McVeigh. Anyway, after the Oklahoma City bombing, Joe Biden wrote anti-terrorism legislation, which was rejected until after September 11th. His legislation became a key component of the Patriot Act, which ties in with the New England Patriots and the New York Jets and the world of rigged sports and how it's synced up with news media. So, you know, that was a recent example, a powerful example where it's like you really don't even need gematria to pick up on some of the details. The average person would probably go, wait a minute, 11/11, George W. Bush, Florida recount. Okay, I see what's going on here. But then to connect those other pieces, such as the death of the voice of Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey, you know, the collapse at Madison Square Garden of Joe Perry, how the Anthony Bourdain piece fits in, that, you know, that takes a little more research and understanding. You have to see the other elements that are out there, such as that show being on CNN, the network that broke the news of the planes going to the tower. So
I think part of it too, sorry to cut you off there, but I think part of it is that people don't read the news. They scan the headlines and they might read a little bit, but they don't really read it. If you actually read these stories, then you might even know what's going on.
Sure, absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah, people. I mean, go ahead.
I mean, a lot of people would say the voice of Hal died. You know, if you're like, what? Like, I'm not even aware of that.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, you have to pay attention to what's going on in this world, and if you're not paying attention, you're going to be in the clouds, which is where most of America is. I mean, most people, and that's the thing. That's the reality of our situation, right? People are grinding. Most people have to work multiple jobs to keep up with the bills, to pay the rent, to, you know, have food on the table. They don't have much time to pay attention to what's in the news. And what free time they do have, most Americans, they spend it with entertainment, sports, TV shows, movies, shopping, hobbies, and it's understandable. The only reason that I've been able to do what I've done is because, you know, literally the day that September 11th happened, I formed this new mission in my life. And, you know, I had a major chip on my shoulder after 9/11 because of the way I was rejected by family and peers and people who I thought were friends. And I said, you know what? I'm going to work to prove what happened on this day and what's really going on in this world. Because I saw the rigged election. That pissed me off too. And then the lies of 9/11, it just took it to a new level. And I said, my new mission in life is to expose the tyranny we're obviously living under, the lies. I'm someone who cares about truth and justice and doesn't like being lied to. And I said, I had the will. Like they say, if there's a will, there's a way. So I had this plan that I was going to figure out how to get ahead in this world so that I could be able to put myself in a situation to figure out what I did. And part of the reason it took me until the age of 30 to figure this out is because I was in the same boat everyone else was. You know, I came from modest means to working class parents that worked 7 days a week for all of my childhood for hardly any income. My mom cleaned houses. My dad drove a delivery truck for a meat company. I had to put myself through school. When I got out of school, I had to pay the bills. I had to work. I had to grind. But all the meanwhile, I still kept an eye on the truth and trying to figure out what was going on. I did not want to participate in the consumer culture. So whatever money I made, aside from paying the bills, I saved. And I always saved because someday I wanted to be able to be in a position where I wouldn't be under somebody else's thumb and I'd be able to be my own boss and work for myself. And by the time I was 30, I was in a good enough financial position where I had money saved up and low expenses. I'd bought my home at the time when the market was at rock bottom, so I had a monthly mortgage payment of $700. I knew how to be a thrifty person. I shopped at grocery outlet. I still do. So I kept my costs really low. I could afford to pay the bills for a long while and take time off from work. A ramping up in censorship. And the way I felt in 2013 was, I better do this right now because in 5 years, I might not have the opportunity to speak back anymore. The window might be closed. The censorship might be full throttle. And about a year ago, I mean, the censorship did go way up on the web. I lost my YouTube channel, so did a lot of other truth speakers. And it seems that it's kind of throttling down right now, but I have no doubt it's going to come back and be even worse. So I just said, okay, I have to go right now, and I need to figure out what I've been looking at and put the pieces of the puzzle together. And with that time off that I was afforded, I was able to finally do enough research to find gematria and take the time to decode and speak out, and have been doing this pretty much for 5 years straight. So I did run out of money doing this. My savings, they ran out at the beginning of this year. And recently I started doing this I don't want to say for profit, but for revenue. I'm saving up all the money that's coming in off this. I am using speaking out to pay the bills right now, but I've set up the Patreon account where I do the daily podcasts, Gematria School, sports picks. For 5 years, I gave people championship winners year in advance for free. Now I'm doing the sports picks at a very small cost. Just for people out there who are interested in ring sports and people who gamble, you can go and pay $50, $100 a week for sports picks, and they're not as good as what I give people at the cost of $5 for an entire month. So I charge a really low amount. I teach people how to do this. I say, hey, by all means, if you learn how to do this and you don't need me, you're welcome to unsubscribe here and go off and apply this knowledge. But anyway, my whole mission right now is to earn up or save enough money from what is coming in to turn this into a true news network to really fight back full time and have employees that can help me out. Anybody who's watched my YouTube videos, I'm a low technology operation. I'm not fancy on the computer or anything. It's all, it's all very simple, the way I do my presentations, but I would like to have a higher production quality, and I'd like to have a team of people who help me with the decoding. And the ultimate dream for me right now is to have enough revenue so that we can travel to where these operations go down and expose them and do some real on-the-ground investigation, even more thorough research than what we're doing right now. And today, I've only been able to do that a couple times, just incidents that have happened in Washington State near where I live. And having that ability to go to the scene, you're always able to gather some extra juicy facts that help take the research to the next level. So I know that if we could do on-the-ground reporting, it could make the work all the more meaningful.
Right. Do you think that these shootings that are happening, are they real? It seems like the group that is in charge of this world aren't exactly nice people, so they very well could be real, right?
I agree. They could be real. And the recurring pattern we see in these shootings again and again is the person who's said to be the shooter is former military more often than not. And it makes me wonder what might be going on with these men, because the military is mind control. These are some of the most mind controlled people on the planet. And with the history of MK Ultra and some of the special programs that some of these military men are in, it makes me wonder what really is going on. And to answer those questions, that's where you got to be on the ground. You got to be at the scene of the shooting. You got to look for the evidence of the shooting. You got to talk to people in the community, what they saw, what they know. So, yeah, I have questions such as that.
So I saw this thing recently, and I'm sure you're aware of Mark Passio. I think you mentioned you are. He talked about, I don't know how recent this video is of him, but he talked about how support the troops is BS, and it should be that if you're a parent of a child who's going to war, you should disown them. You should write them out of the will, not offer any support whatsoever. If your better half, as it were, is going to join the military, you should divorce them or leave them or whatever. He was like laying it down like this should be a signal that this is not right. Have you heard that and say that before?
Yeah, I agree with Mark Passio on a lot of things, and I do share those sentiments. The other part of me realizes that so many people who join the military, they do it out of desperation. A lot of the military, you're either from a military family or you're probably from a community where there's no opportunity for you. And the only way you're going to feed yourself or get an education in this world is by enlisting. And, the things that Mark Passio's ranted about, the same things have come out of my mouth. And over the years, I've softened up because so many people who've latched onto my work are former military, and they now see the truth, and they now want to fight for the truth, and they want to bring awareness. So, I've said some pretty harsh things about people who join the military. Things that have come out of my own mouth is, look, if you're my age or old or younger, you should definitely know not to sign up for the military. I mean, just look at what it's done. Illegal wars. I mean, you're signing up for the New World Order mercenary force. But I understand people in desperate means or desperate times, not a lot of opportunity. They got to do what they got to do. And so So yeah, I agree with Mark Passio, but I do see why people enlist at the same time.
Right. Well, I think his point also was that these are the people we need to reach. We need to reach these people in the military. We need to reach these people in the police who are doing these things or not, or involved in the process. Because without these people, the system couldn't keep going.
Right.
It wouldn't be invading any countries. I guess when they get robots, yes, but right now they can't. Without manpower or woman power.
Absolutely. And without police, then they couldn't enforce their unjust laws and we could shut down their corruption. I made the same point. It's like, you just pay attention. Anytime there's a protest of an injustice in our society, what are the police doing? Well, the police are all lined up, ready to go to war with the protesters. So you see whose side the police are on. They're there as the barrier to protect the tyrants. And it's always been that way.